Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks again, extra over coming to here, gathering in here, and having nice time with us. I'm very excited to meet everyone again. Like, yeah, we all been like so patient for like long 3 years because of the pandemic. And yeah, I am so excited to, like be back again, to have some kind of meetups like this, conference, meetup again, like the friends that we know each other. So yeah, here it comes, Stories on the Road. So yeah, you're in one of the very first edition of our road show. So the idea and the concept is that we're going to go over to one of your towns in the world and we'll do a roadshow and inviting a couple of speakers, like based in these cities, and also, yeah, from Storyblok. We also, send folks like me or Will, and also collaborating with Mark from Beyond Tellerrand to, like exchange some interesting insights, learning together something, like what's new out there in the technologies. So yeah, so you're one of the first one joining. So, but I can, like spend 2 or 3 more hours talking how I'm excited to, like host such kind of the meetups, but instead, because I'm here to share with you, insightful learning as a developer. So here, I'm here to share with you today about internationalization, because I came from the background of the front-end development, and I am still, like working on, but you will see later on, like what I do, usually in my biography. But basically, I'm going to share with you how internationalization gives you the impact, and that's something that you shouldn't, like just overseen. That's also something that would probably like will allowing over 70% more users in the world to access to your apps. So we are going to see how and why with some numbers and statistics and some of the practical approaches. So here's little things about me. My name is Arisa Fukuzaki. You can call me Arisa. I'm originally from Japan, so that's why my name sounds like Japanese, I guess. Anyway, so I am from Storyblok, as Mark and Will introduced me earlier, like here. But I work as a developer relations engineer. So sometimes you might see me in a couple of conferences. I've been traveling like since last year. So yeah, if you see me in another conferences or meetups, feel free to say hi, and I would be really like happy to, like chat with you. So, but not just only, like the work strict side. Outside of my work, I love doing snowboarding. Recently started to do bouldering, so I love pretty much doing like, experimenting new sports, stuff like that. But besides from my work, and also like another, like a little bit like job-related activities, I am an ambassador at Girl Code. So Girl Code is an organization based in actually UK to empower women to, like change their careers to, like in tech or, like studying programming from scratch. So I'm doing an ambassador in there. Also, I'm a GDE in web technologies. So yeah, that's who I am. And you can find me on Twitter. My username on Twitter is arisa_dev. So after you discovered who I am and who you're going to listen to, what kind of topics, here are the 3 takeaways from my talk. So first of all, we are going to see the impact of the internationalization. Well, I think that would be more, like meaningful to know about, like how much impactful, like this topic in here. And next, we're going to see the fundamental logic after we know about some numbers, facts, and the statistics. Then lastly, we're going to see the example of one of the front-end technologies. In this case, I picked the Remix, but you also could probably like think about if you're familiar with the other front-end, frameworks and the libraries. There are a couple of notes that I want you to keep in your mind before watching my talk. So there is still, like discussions going on, especially about the technology I picked, Remix in this case, and the internationalization features. So even, let's say, like standalone internationalization, in my opinion, there's still a lot of rooms that we could improve. So that's why I wanted to, like give some spotlights by picking up one of the front-end technologies. And there's still, it's true, there are some way more rooms to, like improve the DX, I would say, in this case, and also for the UX. And who knows, you could be one of them to, let's say, improve one day the DX for the developers and the user experience as well. So if you're interested in to join the discussions or to contribute, here's the link that you can join. And I will make sure later on after this after my talk, not after the meetup, but after my talk, to share my slides later on Twitter. So you will have access to all the links and the sources that I'm going to share. So here's the thing, internationalization. And we are going to see, first of all, the voices from the developers who are in the front lines and dealing with internationalization to, like implement into their apps, as well as we are going to see some of the numbers and statistics to take the balance, of your knowledge. So whenever I start to create my talks nowadays, I want to hear, the real voices from the developers out there. So I started to ask this question on Twitter. So do you like to implement in general, overall in general, about the internationalization logic? So I was able to get a couple of answers on Twitter. So sorry if it's a little bit too small, but I'm going to read out loud what's in there. So I was able to reach out to 36 developers on Twitter. And what they responded to me from the three options were like, it's not, like 41.7% of the developers, they responded to me like, it's not their really, favorite, I would say like implementations to do that. And in fact, it's not something they enjoy. So this is actually, the real voices out there, the developers who are implementing internationalization. It means that the DX for them is not something pleasant, right? So we can say that it's not a, I would say like prioritized hot topic compared with like accessibilities and performance, right? I think you hear or heard a lot about like accessibilities and the performance improvements, but I wonder like, how many people have heard about like good internationalization to implement. So I didn't want to stop in there like, oh, okay, internationalization is maybe not something people would be interested in, then I just would leave it off. No, I didn't want to leave it like this, so I wanted to know why. So I asked further. So if the internationalization is not your favorite part to implement, why is it like this? So here's my friend, Maya. And she responded me on Twitter based on her experience. So based on, she was like saying like, there's the cost to relearn every single time whenever she uses the internationalization library. So imagine that you need to, like relearn, the stuff you used before, but need to do again because there are some new changes, etc. It's kind of, like a repetitive experience, right? Plus, there's also the concerns between localized text versus the internationalization keys in test. So from her point of view, I already could tell, okay, there are some extra works that she needs to do when it comes to, like implementing the internationalization. And that's not something we developers would enjoy, right? We want to reduce the repetitive amount of the work. So now we know, the voices from the developers telling us that in general, like the DX in internationalization to implement such features are not the best yet. But based on what we know and what we think as a developer's perspective, we also should take a look at, some statistics and numbers. So we are going to start to talk about something big numbers, starting from something billions. And I'm going to start from 5.07 billion. So, and also want to ask you, what do you think this number stands for? Any thoughts? Any guess?
Population of China.
Ah, that's a good direction, I would say.
I wish it was my salary, but no.
Me too. I saw a hand
I think
over there.
English speakers.
Ah, that's also a good direction to go. Okay, So here's the answer. This is actually the number of the users in the world who use the internet. So billions of people, over 5 billion of the people have the access to use the internet. And based on this huge, massive number, we're going to break down this huge number into some percentages. And you might be surprised. So starting from 25.9%. So based on what we saw, the billions of numbers, what do you think this percentage stands for? I want to hear another guess.
English speakers or readers?
That's a really good one. You nearly got. It's actually the English content on the internet. It's not even 50%. It's 25.9%. And I am so shocked to see, like these numbers on the statistics. It's not just the random number that I picked up randomly on the internet. It's the statistics I searched. So if you're good at in math, you could probably calculate this number, yes? I'm not challenging you, don't worry. I already made a calculation. So 74.1% is the numbers of the users who access non-English content. Over 70% of the users in this world accessing, non-English content. And which leads to this keyword that I heard before, China. Yes, China has the most internet, users in worldwide. And no surprise to come up with this another keyword, Asia. Yes, let's face the facts in here. Asia leads more than a half of the global internet users, more than a half on this, entire world. That's quite massive, right? So, yes, now we know. Localizing content or implementing internationalization are not a hot topic, maybe from what we heard, the voices from the developers. But we cannot ignore such massive, huge numbers of the users on the internet nowadays, getting access to your applications, right? If you ignore these huge, massive numbers of the people, users out there, you can imagine how much opportunities you're losing, right? So based on the voices from the developers and knowing about the current DX for the developers, and also some numbers and the statistics, the demands of the internationalization and the impacts, now let's talk about the fundamental logic, how you can implement internationalization. So there are in general 3 ways to determine languages and the regions. So starting from the top, for example, by detecting the locations of the users from the IP address, will of course show the let's say localized content, but based on their physical locations. So for example, I travel from Germany because I live in Germany. So when I see some of the content on the internet, web apps, then because of where I'm based, the content would be displayed in German. But my German is really not good. So I really need an English option or Japanese option. So for that case, moving on to the second option, using the accept languages header or navigator languages. In this way, you're going to track the user's preferred language option. And the third option is creating the identifiers in the URL. So in this talk, I'm going to go with the 2 ways to go hybrid. So excluding the first option, because maybe there are a couple of the users like me who want to have the language options, right? To set up their preferred language from the settings, and also want to manually pick probably the options on the UI. So that's why we are going to go with the 2 hybrid ways. And I'm going to show you a little bit visualized example for the identifiers on the URLs. So there are 3 patterns. So starting from the pattern 1 is differentiating with different domains. But there are a couple of issues because, first of all, it's not going to align with the same origin policy. Because of the end of the domains are different, these hello.com and hello.es will be considered as different, separated websites. So you don't want to have this, right? You don't want to be considered as both websites are mine, but one of them is considered as something fake. right? So we don't want that. So moving on to the pattern 2. But this also has another issue. So in this example or pattern, we use the URL parameters. Maybe for developers, it makes sense. But imagine, let's say, like non-developers taking a look at this URL. And if you have like many more page content inside and the URLs are going to be like long URLs, you're not going to enjoy that, right? So it's not user-friendly. And moving on to the pattern 3, which looks an ideal option, in my opinion here, is localizing the sub-directories. So we follow the same origin from the domain, plus after the forward slash path looks clean. So that's what we want to achieve, and it looks quite user-friendly. So after we know the logic, how it works, now let's talk about the frameworks and libraries. But why suddenly out of nowhere start to talk about the frameworks and the libraries? Here's the reason. Because some of the frameworks and the libraries already use the i18n frameworks. That's why. And as one of the examples from the front-end technologies, in this case, I picked the Remix. So we can take a look at together how it works. And in this example, there are two approaches. So first of all, using one of the NPM packages called Remix i18 Next. And the second approach is together with the combination of the content management system. So we're going to see together from the first option. So this Remix i18 Next is an NPM package, like I said before, but dedicated for Remix to use i18 Next. So if you're looking for another frameworks or libraries, there most likely would be like the dedicated NPM packages. So here's the example. There would be like a couple of codes, but if I go too fast, don't worry, I'm going to share with you the slides later on, so you can have a look at it later on and even can test it in your environment. So first thing first, we are going to start to create the translation of files. In this example on the screen, I decided to go with the English as a default language and Japanese as a translated option. So I have created two translation of files. The first one is the English. So I set the property name as greeting. And I also follow the same property name greeting to the Japanese translated files, but the value in there would be different. One is in English, the other one is in the Japanese. Next up, we are going to create the i18 Next configuration of file so that we will be able to call a couple of the values, properties, later on in the further slides. So in here, I am configuring the supported languages. As I said before, I'm going with the English as a default and Japanese as translated option. That's why you see the EN and JA option. Oh, my pointer is not working, sorry. And of course, we want to set the fallback language as well. So I set the fallback language this time to be a default English. And there's the default namespace. This time I gave a name as common. Let me go back to the previous slides, because in these translated files, I gave names for these files to be common.json. That's what it's coming from. So now we have configured two things, right? Translation of files and the i18 Next configuration of file. So moving on to the one of the server side, let's say configuration of file, code i18next.server.js file. And then here, I am importing the i18 Next configuration file from the previous slide. And then what I'm doing is that I'm calling the properties that I have set the values from the previous slide. So now I have called the supported languages and the fallback language options. And here, on the middle part of this slide, what I'm doing is that first of all, like iterating the arrays and the strings that are coming from the i18 Next configuration file from the previous slides. And then in the end, what I'm doing in this load path is that I am setting the translation file paths so that we don't lose the track where we are getting the translation files. And then let's move on to create the client side and server side configuration of files. But as you can see, that I kind of grayed out one of the files. I'm going to cover the client side because I do not want to, like talk about something duplicate or like looks quite similar or almost the same files. So we are going to see together the client side file as an example. So at entry.client.jsx file, here we're doing a couple of the things, but please just only pay attention to the only highlighted part so that your mind still would be clear and can focus, right? It's already evening, maybe you're after work, so I want to be, like more precise and focused. Okay, so let's pay attention to this API right here with the orange highlight called i18n Next Provider. And please pay attention where I am importing this API. So this is actually coming from React i18 Next. That's another NPM package that you would like to install in this example. So what I'm doing is that, first of all, I want to achieve two things in this file. The first thing is waiting to ensure that the translations are loaded before the hydration happens. And we are going to see why from a little bit visualized example on the following slides. And the second thing that I want to do in here is wrapping the Remix browser, this component right here, in i18n Next Provider, the API we call. And we are also going to see why on the next slides with a little bit more visualized information. So, starting from the first thing that I want to do in the previous slide, why I want to why the translation should be loaded before the hydration happens. So, imagine there's an UI to switch the language between back and forth, English and Japanese. And users want to see, hello being translated into English or Japanese. In this case, if the translation is not loaded before the hydration happens, UI is ready, yes, but technically the application itself is not yet interactive, right? So means that when the users click the Japanese option, they don't see hello being translated. So they're going to wonder like, why it's not being translated? But if the translations are loaded before the hydration, the user interface is already interactive and also the translated values are interactive as well. So that's why you can see, like as a user, when you click the Japanese option, then you can see hello being translated. So moving on to the second things that I wanted to achieve on the previous slides. So why wrapping Remix browser component with i18n Next Provider? So I dig deeper into the NPM module package, and I was able to reach out to how this i18n Next Provider API was being defined or like being configured. So again, only pay attention to the highlighted part. And here what I was able to find is that this API is using the useMemo, a React hook. So to, let's say, like sync together what useMemo is doing is that this hook caches the result of the calculation between re-render. If I say a little bit easier way, means in this case, if the configuration, i18n configuration, and the default namespaces are not changed at all, then we are going to use the cache. So it doesn't trigger the re-rendering. Means it's going to be a little bit more performant, or maybe more than a little bit. So, and the only thing we're going to trigger the re-rendering is if the values of the internationalization configuration and the default namespaces are changed. So, I told you before that I'm not going to do like kind of similar content by going to, like the server side. But to give you the quick info, identifying users' preferred languages and the redirecting them can be done on the server side. And that's what you can take a look at, in the server side configuration files. I can tell you it looks quite similar, only a few differences. So I would highly recommend you to take a look at it after my talk. So now let's move on to use what we configured in action. We configured a lot, but in this file, what I want you to pay attention is only 3 APIs. So don't worry about a bunch of lines of the code in here. So we are going to start to see together from loader function. So this loader function is actually an API coming from Remix side. So in this file, at the directory of the app root.jsx, we are going to, call the loader, which is a backend API from Remix. The reason is because this loader function is already wired up through the other API called on the here at the middle, use loader data. And in this case, in this example, this use loader data already gets the the locale from the loader function. And then in the end, what we can do in here by this API called JSON, by the way, this is an API, is that instead of setting new response and then writing headers and a few more lines of the code, you can do the same thing by calling this simple one API JSON. And in the end, right here, sorry, I didn't highlight, but in this function called use change language, this, I would say use change language changes the internationalization instance language to the current locale detected by the loader function. And then the locale will be updated. Also, the i18n next loads the correct translation files. And then here's the more visualized example, how you can finally, let's say, call the function that or the APIs together that you configured. So you can see, the hello is being translated, in this case, is in Spanish. And then what I'm doing is that, well, we saw together where this use translation, I would say API is coming from, and this is coming from React i18n next. And what we are doing is that, remember one of the first slides that I configured and set the values of the translation files. So I set the property for Japanese and in English to have the greeting, right? So that's why I was able to translate this greeting. But if you were paying really close attention to this quick video, you might have realized here in the URL, there is a very sneaky glitch going on, right? So if you call this, it means I have 3 confessions to make. Let me be honest. Yeah, I used the URL parameters. That's why you saw this sneaky little glitch. And secondly, do we developers need to maintain the translation of files? Unfortunately, yes, we need to do in this way because I just showed you 2 translation files, right? We don't want to do that. And lastly, did we translate the slugs? No, I don't think so. You just saw that I used the URL parameters, right? So in this case, I sneaked a bit. So here's another friend of mine, Bart, on Twitter, also gave me quite similar kind of opinion that splitting up the translation files per route is possible technically, but it's cumbersome still. So ideally, it's better to have some localized URL. So we want to achieve, first of all, localizing URLs and also no translation files in the code. We don't want to maintain translated files over there. So here's another approach together with the content management system. In this case, I would say Headless CMS approach. So for this talk, I picked the Storyblok, but you can choose other CMS if you like. But in my case, that's the most comfortable and I would say user-friendly Headless CMSs as a developer, and also I find pretty much easy working together with the content editors or anyone who works with you. So, but the thing is, I'm not going to show you another 30 minutes of how you can integrate and connect with Storyblok. So here's the QR code that you can jump right into the tutorial. Then you can have a look at it after my talk. So by choosing Storyblok, you have 4 options or 4 ways to make the internationalization. I would say layout in this case. So it's not just you, but your content editors also have the options to decide which way they want to go and organize the localized content. But from the time slot I have left, probably it's a few more minutes, so I'm going to cover the folder level translation. But if you're interested in to talk about the other approaches, I'll be hanging around, after my talk and in this meetup, so feel free to talk to me and I'm happy to show you. So instead of just explaining verbally, I want to go always visualize. So this is how the folder level translation looks like. You don't see any codes in here, but it's because this is more of like deciding the layout or the structure that you're going to organize your localized content. So here you can see like in each folders there are dedicated localized content, so that you as developers and also the content editors do not mix up the localized content. So here's another small quick video. You can see like how it's going to work. So instead of seeing the code first, I like to go from the result first. So here I'm at the blog overview, let's say the URL, and now moved into traveling to Salt Lake City in the default language. So in the default language, I do not want to include the default language slug, but if I go to the Japanese version of exactly the same, blog entry, I want to have this Japanese slug, JA, being included. And in fact, you can see all the localized content on the right-hand side, so that your content editors can start to already fill out the content, and you can focus on to implement the front-end side. And if I go back to the blog overview in Japanese in this case, now you can see translated slug being added in this case. And if I go back to the default language and go into the root of this project, now you can see, that instead of seeing EN, which is a default, let's say translated slug, you can see the cleaner version of the URL. So to implement such kind of, let's say, implementations, sorry about my English, it's not my first language, but I think you get my point. You can achieve by using the splat routes. And this approach is actually coming from Remix side, so that you do not need to hard code such kind of, let's say, structures by yourself. There are already a couple of useful APIs that you can just simply call from Remix side, and it just works on the fly. So I bet that you have already seen a couple of APIs that I highlighted, such as use loader data, didn't highlight, but loader, and also JSON over here. So again, starting from the loader function, this is a backend API, and it's already connected with the use loader data. And in this case, this use loader data already returns the JSON parsed data from the loader function. So for this talk, I can tell that this Storyblok data that is parsed JSON is being returned. And then in the end, what you can do is JSON API, the one we just took a look at it before. So to enable this kind of, I would say, dynamic path, and so that your content editors even can create, the new content of the pages, and already can have such, modified translated slugs, is that first of all, you can call the special parameter called params. And with this params, there is a, with array, I would say value with the string asterisk, so that by calling this params parameter, you can, easily do the console.log and see the values. But whenever you switch back and forth different, pages, you can see all the full path are being, returned. So that's the magic, there is already here. You can just call simply. Do not need to hard code such kind of implementation by yourself. And then I'm almost there. Here's the summary. So more than we know now from the statistics and the numbers, more than half of the users in this world, they access to localized content. We cannot ignore this, numbers and the facts, right? And the thing is, we admit that the DX of the internationalization is still I would say right in progress, maybe. There are some rooms that we could improve a lot, yes. So this talk is not that I'm showing this is the solution that you should stick with. No, it's not about that. But I just wanted to give you more options to think about, and knowing that, so that you can choose the best way for your case. And lastly, consider the performance and UI, UX as well with internationalization. We saw together with an example that, when the translation files should be loaded, is it before hydration or after hydration, right? So internationalization also plays a quite big role to improve the performance as well, and UI, UX. And lastly, this is a last favor from my side. Any feedback, literally any feedback, would improve my talk. I'm still, learning how to provide better talks. So I would be really, really happy to see if you, write me some of the comments on a Twitter, or feel free to, come and talk to me later on. And I'm happy to, make some conversation, discussions with you, anything in general. So. Thank you so much for listening to my talk. Let's enjoy the rest of the stories on the road.